And at that time too, it was like professional development wasn't allowed. So here I am trying to learn by doing, right? But I wasn't allowed to go to AFP. I wasn't allowed to get the support that I needed
Oh, wow.
to learn how to do major gifts or how to write a grant or how to plan an event, like an effective event, right? Like I learned by doing. And so I felt really isolated. I felt alone and I felt like I wasn't supported in the role. And so knowing now what I know, those are questions that I ask in interviews to make sure that I can feel supported and show up as my best self so I'm not burnt out.
Welcome to the Abundant Vision Fundraising Podcast. Whether you are a seasoned professional or a first-time fundraiser, we have the advice you need to take your next step toward major gift mastery. I'm your host, Tom Dauber, President of Abundant Vision Philanthropic Consulting. Well, I am so pleased today to have my colleague, Haley Cooper, with us today on the Abundant Vision Fundraising Podcast. Haley, you're like me. You're a consultant. You do a lot of great work with a lot of nonprofits out there. Really looking forward to talking with you about it today. Maybe before we jump into the fundraising, could you share with the audience a little bit about, what do you like to do with your time when you're not consulting?
I love that question. So I'm a mom of 3 kids under 5. So
All right.
when I'm not working, my days are, consumed with parenting and motherhood while also trying to take care of myself. So things I love to do with my kids, I live in Orange County, California. We are annual pass holders to Disneyland. So, do the parent math, pay $500 per person to go to a park, right? Instead of all the free parks that are here. So we love to go to Disneyland. My kids love Star Wars. And we also, can find us at parks with our family, going on vacation to Park City, Utah or Colorado. I also just got a sourdough starter. So I have been experimenting with all the sourdough recipes. Current favorite is making overnight cinnamon rolls. And yeah, I also, in my own spare time, love to read. And I also love to work out. That is my own mental health, is getting exercise in, and just that hour of space for myself is really important and a non-negotiable for myself and my family. Also, and I know you're a believer as well, we also love to go to church and be involved in our church family.
Oh, that's fantastic, Haley. Now Haley, I failed to mention when I introduced you. You are the founder and president of the Savvy Fundraiser. What a great name for a consultancy. Let me just say that. That's great.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And what's funny is I just enrolled my kids in a private Christian school. And my husband was like, you said self-employed, because I don't want them to know that I'm a fundraiser, because then I'm going to have to do all the galas. But he's like, you wrote down the Savvy Fundraiser as your business, so they're going to know you're a fundraiser. And I was like, oh, dang it. Yes, I know.
Oh my goodness. I'll tell you what, that's one of those things, doing galas, doing events, doing bake sales, all the things that's many small nonprofits, churches, schools think are, this is the way to raise money. They just makes me want to pull my hair out sometimes,
Yeah.
One of the things here in Columbus, Ohio, where I'm at, I don't know if you see this out in California, mattress sales are a big thing for like my son's band, high school band. That was their big fundraiser for the years, is selling mattresses. And I'm like, what a weird thing to raise money with, because how often do you buy a new mattress? Do you see that sort of thing out there?
So, I haven't seen that. And I've also worked in a lot of shelters for people experiencing homelessness, and we weren't allowed to accept mattresses unless they were like brand new.
Yeah.
Because of, health and hygiene and everything.
Sure.
So no, I haven't really seen. I've seen like car washes, bake sales, lemonade stands, but no, not mattress sales.
Yeah. It's the weirdest thing. I don't know. It must be a Midwest thing. Well, so tell me a little bit about how you got into the nonprofit world, Haley.
Yeah, great question. So my professional journey began straight out of college. I graduated with a degree in kinesiology in 2011, thought I wanted to be a registered dietitian, but I was sitting in my parents' church at the where they were at the time, and someone on stage said they were going to Malawi, Africa. And that was the summer after I graduated in 2011. And while my parents and grandparents are philanthropic locally, they had never really traveled outside of the country except for like pleasure.
Mhm.
And honestly, I didn't even know what a nonprofit was, even though I grew up going to ballet dances, grew up going to fashion shows. But I didn't really understand what philanthropy and nonprofits were until I went on that missions trip and really got to see what ministry was. And like I said, during the time between that ministry trip, which I think if you've all been on one, you know you have this fire set in you. And after like 2 weeks to a month, it kind of dies down. You're like, I just did something amazing. Like you see all this heartbreak, but you also see a lot of joy. You were in service to other people. And I was kind of lost in my journey of trying to become a registered dietitian, but I was getting denial after denial. And about 6 months after that first trip, the leader of that trip called me into his office and he goes, Haley, do you want to go make peanut butter for a year in Malawi, Africa? And I was like, sure, let's do it. And he's like, no, Haley, go home and pray on it. Like, this is a big decision. Like, you're going to have to figure out literally how to make this product and build a factory and get it to sell.
Wow.
So I moved to Malawi, Africa in August of 2012, where I co-founded PB&J, Peanut Butter and Jesus. And this initiative literally involved the development of a peanut butter product, which we were able to license from the original founder of this product with the intention that if we ever sold it, there'd be a 1% royalty fee. So we were able to go to that factory and see how they operated. But when we got there, it was we were told there was going to be a factory, but it was literal rubble. So in 2 weeks, we had to build a functional factory. We started with KitchenAid mixers, but then was able to source from a man in South Africa actual factory grade equipment.
Mm-hmm.
And so I developed this product with help from the other co-founders and a Malawian country director from inception to operation and through strategic planning and implementation. My last trip there was to Copenhagen to a UNICEF conference so that we could position PB&J as a supplier for facilitating widespread distribution across the country. And like I mentioned before, PB&J is called Peanut Butter and Jesus. So it wasn't just about feeding hungry bellies. It was really about preaching the gospel to the chiefs. We had a chiefs ministry. They still do to this day, nourishing souls and sparking change. So, my journey started in the heart of Africa, but here I am 12 years later, and I have worked in all sorts of nonprofit teams, both large and small, mostly in human services, homelessness, and youth sectors, doing fundraising. And let's just say I have worn all the hats.
I'll bet you have. Wow, that's a great story. Not everybody starts out in Africa and then works their way back. So that's really cool. Well, today you're a consultant. Uh, Tell us a little bit about what you do today.
Yeah, so I started the Savvy Fundraiser in 2022. Like I mentioned, I have 3 kids under 5, and I was working as the director of development at a wonderful organization here in Orange County. And I went on maternity leave, and at the time, my 4-year-old he has developmental delays, so he had a lot of intervention when he was 2. And so that was really my role, to take on that mom caregiving role, making sure that he had the support he needed. And, working full time as a director of development just wasn't realistic for my family. So through my maternity leave, I always like to say I kind of created like a personal board of directors, who they still are today, where I was like, this is what I see a need is. And it's going to be related to what we talk about in terms of burnout in fundraising. And I saw a need, and I was trained in this process called EMC leadership, which was founded by Dr. Lola Gershfeld. And it's all about managing the art of relationships in your team so that you can better communicate, collaborate, and innovate. And so I was trained in this process, but I saw that, just doing fundraising wasn't enough. Like, I could write your email campaigns, I could do your year-end appeals, but if there's no strategy and no way for your team to really embrace the idea of fundraising, you're not going to move the needle forward. So my mission is really to empower emerging organizations with the tools and expertise that they need to thrive. and I specialize in designing and implementing fundraising strategies tailored to each nonprofit that I partner with. And I help you chart a clear path forward. So we tackle the overwhelm and frustration by focusing on the right fundraising strategies and getting buy-in and belonging from your team to create what most people call a culture of philanthropy, but Dr. Lola Gershfeld calls it a culture of connection, which is essentially the same thing, where everyone sees their role in fundraising, they understand how important they are to each other and the mission, and really gain that clarity so that you're not just throwing spaghetti at the wall and seeing what fundraising strategy sticks, or if a board member tells you, oh, this organization had an event, we should try it too. And then you feel the pressure that you need to then host that event and take away from the time that everything else has. So let's get real clear on that strategy and make sure that every single person in the organization knows where you're going.
Wow. That sounds like a fantastic service that you're providing.
Thank you.
So you mentioned that you've got expertise in this area of fighting burnout. What made you interested in that area?
That's a great question. So I think my own personal experience of burnout throughout my career, also just the conversations that I've had with nonprofit leaders, feeling like they can't keep their head above water, they're drowning, they have lost motivation, they think something's wrong with them, they feel alone and isolated. And this idea that our missions are literally for wellness and for health in communities. And if the people on the inside of our organizations are feeling this way, then we're doing a disservice to our mission and our community. We have to take care of the people internally so that we can execute our missions externally. Because at the end of the day, the people in our missions are in our community. And I'll also say, as a fundraiser, my job is to steward our money well, steward the money that comes into our organization well. But if we know that, every organization, the average turnover for fundraisers is 18 to 24 months, and high turnover equals high cost fundraising.
That's right.
And so if I'm not investing in my people, if I'm not making sure that their wellness is a priority, then we're doing a disservice to our donors as well, because we're not stewarding their money, because it takes I think it's double the salary to hire someone new after you've lost someone. And so if we took that time and effort to make sure that, there's obviously a lot of factors that come into burnout, but then we're stewarding our money well, and we're also delivering on the mission that we set out, the impact that we set out with the dollars raised for our mission.
Got it. Haley, could I ask you a personal question about your own experience of burnout? What were the things that were coming together in your life professionally and personally that led you to a point of feeling burnt out?
Let's see. I think, I'll give you the context. So when I stepped away from PB&J, I had entered an organization as a development assistant.
Mm-hmm.
And within 2 weeks of me entering that position, and like I said, I was an ED of an organization, but I had never really done fundraising, but obviously had built a company, but I then had to go back. And within 2 weeks of me being hired, both a development director and development assistant quit. And we had a gala to plan for 3 months, but none of the groundwork had been done. And I had never planned a gala before. So quickly I had to learn major gifts, sponsorship, all the event logistics, right? Of how do you set the experience? How do you set the tone? And so I felt really alone in that role, that I didn't have the support that I needed. And I felt like I had other tasks as assigned, right? So I had my day job, and then I was planning this event and doing major gifts. And I mean, I was working round the clock. And recently I was asking my husband, what did we do with our weekends before kids? And he's like, I think we just worked. We had no off button. And obviously before we had kids over the last 4 years, when I was working in house, in 2020 to 2022, there was no off button, right?
Yeah.
Especially because we were working from home. And so I think getting having that pressure of not being able to set boundaries, not being able to ask for help, feeling the weight of the organization on my shoulders, that if this event didn't go well, or if I didn't meet these expectations, that I wasn't good enough and that something was wrong with me or I couldn't do it. I couldn't live up to the expectation. So I put all of the weight of this organization, and I mean, I've done this throughout my career, I guess. And
Tom Dauber here for Abundant Vision Philanthropic Consulting. Fundraising can be hard work, and it can be hard to mentally get into the place you need to be in order to see new opportunities. Everyone struggles with it. We are like the fish in the fishbowl who just can't see the water they're swimming in. That's when having outside expertise comes in handy. For 25 years, I've been helping nonprofits analyze their challenges, discover new ways forward, and develop clear plans that lead to greater fundraising revenues. Now I am available to help your organization develop the abundant vision it needs to inspire new levels of philanthropy at your nonprofit as well. Check out abundantvision.net to start your journey toward greater fundraising success today. Now, back to the show.
Had to learn how to set boundaries, be clear and ask for support, understand what is important to me, what my values are, what my mission is, how I want to show up in the world, and being able to evaluate, in that context of this is what I want for my career, this is what I need to support me, and then evaluating if that organization is able to provide that space for me to not only, and at that time too, it was like professional development wasn't allowed. So here I am trying to learn by doing, right? But I wasn't allowed to go to AFP. I wasn't allowed to get the support that I needed to learn how to do major gifts or how to write a grant or how to plan an event, like an effective event, right? Like I learned by doing. And so I felt really isolated. I felt alone and I felt like I wasn't supported in the role. And so knowing now what I know, those are questions that I ask in interviews to make sure that I can feel supported and show up as my best self. So I'm not burnt out in the process.
That sounds like a really tough situation that you had to navigate there, Haley. I'm glad you made your way through it.
Yes, I have a very supportive husband.
Oh, goodness. Well, so what exactly is burnout? How can I tell if I have burnout or if I'm just having a bad day or a bad week?
That's a great question. So I literally looked up the definition of burnout. So according to the internet, burnout is a state of complete mental, physical, and emotional exhaustion. And if you're experiencing burnout, you may notice it is difficult to engage in activities you normally find meaningful. You lose interest, you lose passion. And we all know that we get into nonprofits on passion, right? That's why we serve. And you may start to know you lack motivation, you're exhausted, you're irritable, you have no motivation. I don't know if I already said that. And I just want to say that those feelings are normal. And burnout is the last symptom. Like, especially if you're having physical symptoms, that is something, we are all wired to live in acute states of stress. Like we all grew up, like, when they were cavemen, they always had to be on alert because of wild animals or like fighting, right? But we're not supposed to be in this chronic state of stress, in this chronic state of fight and flight. And so when you're experiencing burnout, and especially when it gets to physical symptoms, like I've had people my age in mid 30s, like experience heart issues, experience really difficult physical symptoms. But that's not something that happens overnight, especially if it's stress related. This is something that has compounded over and over again. And so it can be really hard to notice in the moment. And for example, 2 years ago, my husband went through really bad burnout. And I took it as one way. And I thought that it was like something wrong with me, right? But after we delved deeper into it, he was having panic attacks. He lost weight because he couldn't sleep, he couldn't eat. And so it was really like taking time to notice what was going on and just acknowledging it. And then because when you're in that heightened sense of burnout, your amygdala takes over your prefrontal cortex. So you're not able to think logically. You're not able to see a chart forward. You get those feelings of isolation, of there's something wrong with me, like I said before, but there's nothing wrong with you. It's literally your nervous system just wreaking havoc because there isn't that, like you haven't learned the skills or the systems to prevent burnout. And for him, it took 6 months for him to heal from burnout. He had to quit his job or step away for a time, take a sabbatical. And it took 6 months for him to finally feel like he could come above water. And that was also by learning tools to notice, like, am I leaning into people pleasing? Do I need to set boundaries? Do I need to speak up here? Like, what is my fear about this organization? And so I don't know if that answers your question, but I think at the end of the day, it's something that it's not easy to recognize, and you're not alone in this feeling. I know that like it's really high in the nonprofit state, and I just want to say there's nothing wrong with you. It is something that is like biological in when we are in these chronic states of stress.
Well, that's a really important truth, I think, for someone listening right now who might be wrestling with burnout, to remember. What advice would you have for those folks beyond what you've already shared that find themselves struggling with burnout? What should they do?
That's a good question. So, reflecting on my own experiences, think I think it's always a twofold conversation whenever I'm having these conversations, because yes, I say fundraising is an inside job. You have to lead well from within, but it's also an organizational issue. If the organization, like I said in my own experience, isn't providing you professional development, they're not paying you well, you're constantly living in that scarcity mindset. Like it's that twofold issue where yes, there's only so much that we can heal inside ourselves and like set those boundaries, but the organization also has to create that safe and supportive environment to allow you to allow you to ask for help, to invest in you, because everyone wants to feel valued, seen, and heard, right? And so we have to be able to create that within ourselves, but our organizations also have to create spaces where we feel safe, where we because that is essential for addressing burnout. And what I also talk about is this idea of vicarious trauma among nonprofit professionals.
Hmm.
So, this includes fostering a culture of open communication, empathy, and like I said, where people feel empowered to seek help. And back to your question, asking for help is probably the first step. Acknowledging you have burnout and then asking for help, which I know is the bravest and most vulnerable and courageous thing that you could do. But asking for help will help you recognize the signs and start to heal those parts of you. Like I said, it takes a long time to heal from burnout. It
Mhm.
takes a long time to kick on your parasympathetic nervous system that helps you relax and rest and learn that that's okay. So I think, the organization needs to create that environment of safety and trust, while also the individual takes that time to just acknowledge and then ask for help.
So if I'm asking for help, is that going to a manager? Is that looking for a counselor? Like what's the next step for somebody?
I would say seeking out a coach, a mentor, or a counselor.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, maybe I don't have burnout, but maybe I want to avoid getting it. How do I protect myself from becoming a burnt out professional?
So, like I said, in my own experience, I got really clear on what my mission, my vision, and my values were for my life.
Hmm.
And so I think that is really important for individuals to chart out what's important to them. How do they want to show up? How do they want to feel in the context of leadership roles or in their fundraising or nonprofit professional roles? And then setting boundaries according to that mission, vision, and values.
Hmm.
Because, for me, the reason why I went into consulting was because I wanted more flexibility to be with my kids. But if I was working full time, and luckily I have the financial means to do so, not everyone does, but maybe it's asking to not work on evenings, or, like having that flex time of,
Yeah.
let's say you had to meet at, we all know events and we all run events and then you have to do everything the next morning, like asking for that flex time and saying, this is really important to me for me to show up in this role the way that you want me to. I need to take that half day the next day, or I need to take the whole day the next day because I worked so hard to rest, to book an appointment. And so I think, yeah, it's really getting clear on what's important to you, how you want to show up, and then setting those boundaries to live accordingly. Because when you start to drift from your values, you start to get that internal conflict of this doesn't feel good. You start to get frustrated, resentful. And again, that's just how we're wired. And so I think getting really clear on what you want and how you want to live and your why of it all too is important.
So, with asking for help being such an important first step, what is it, do you think, like as you've worked with fundraisers and other nonprofit professionals, what makes it so hard for them to ask for help? We help people. We're in the nonprofit world. You'd think it would be easy, right?
Yeah, I think it's that level of vulnerability. Like we are like we come into this nonprofit field that we're going to save people, we're going to save the world, we're going to save the environment, right? We have this idea of saviorism, and we put all of this pressure on ourselves to be that savior and to come in, and at least from my own experience, and also like we're the leaders, we should know how to do this. Everything should be figure outable, right? Like if we can't figure it out, who else can? And I think it's also this like fear about ourselves. Like if I can't figure this out, if I can't do this, I'm not good enough. Something's wrong with me. People will think less of me. Those kind of narratives that we have in our brain. And so I think, and then we also have our fear about the relationship. Like, what if we are vulnerable? What if we ask for help and then we're rejected? Like,
Yeah.
that doesn't feel good either, right? Like,
Right.
I've had those experiences where I've asked for help and people have told me no. And then I'm like, oh, okay. Like, this, like, I don't want to ever ask for help again, right? So I think it's understanding the context of like, what are your fears about yourself? What are your fears about what if you do ask for help, the level of vulnerability that it takes to ask for help. And then I think once you start to, you realize that the rejection really isn't about you. I know it's hard to say but like rejection isn't personal per se. And, it takes the most courageous thing you can do. I think Brene Brown says it is to be vulnerable. I'm paraphrasing. I don't know her actual quote, but I know that she talks a lot about vulnerability and courage. And so I think that's what keeps people from asking for help is I have to be the one that's at the front of the organization. I should know how to do it all. I fear not being good enough if I can't figure it out. I fear the rejection from the other person and that level of vulnerability that it takes to delve into that.
Wow. It reminds me as you're saying that, it seems like there's a lot of overlap between the fear as fundraisers that we have to get over, the fear of rejection in asking someone, for support. It's those same types of fears that we have to get over to ask for the help, for our own personal emotional growth, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's interesting. Well, Holly, is there any other advice that you'd give nonprofit leaders about staying in an emotionally healthy space?
Yeah, great question. So I think investing in your own well being and professional development is not only a moral imperative, but it's also a strategic one. And like I said, for organizations, like at the beginning, I said it's literally being good stewards of your funds. And so, from an organizational standpoint, it's just a strategic imperative. You have to invest. And I posted on my LinkedIn the other day that got a lot of likes about like this idea of overhead and how we all talk about overhead and like how there was like I don't know who the podcast host was, but was talking about like how like overhead shouldn't be invested in. But if you want to carry out your mission well, invest in the well-being of your people,
Yeah.
invest in the priority. And then, Leading Well from Within is a book by Dr. Danny Friedland. Wonderful, wonderful man. He has since passed, but I learned a lot about him in terms of, stress management and being aware of, when you have those thoughts, when you have those beliefs, because our beliefs influence our emotions and our emotions influence our actions. And so understanding like, what are your beliefs about yourself in this context? What are your fears? And then, just be I know it's hard, but having the vulnerability to set those boundaries and ask for support.
That's great advice. Thank you so much for sharing that with us, Haley. Um, Boy, it's been such a pleasure to have you on. I think there's a lot of times we go through hard things as nonprofit professionals, as fundraisers, executive directors, and there's not always that sympathetic ear there. And so it's so wonderful and so important, the insight and support that you're bringing to our profession. Thank you for doing that, Haley.
Thank you so much, Thomas. It's been a joy.
Yeah. Well, that about wraps it up for today's episode. Again, so grateful to have you on. Really look forward to talking with you more about fundraising down the road. Wish you the best in your consultancy.
Thank you.
All right. Now, if you've enjoyed this podcast, please be sure to subscribe and give us a 5-star rating on your podcast provider. As always, I'm your host, Tom Dauber. Thank you for joining me as we journey together toward major gift mastery on the Abundant Vision Fundraising Podcast.